Good morning and welcome to the second edition of Join the Dots, Find the Truth. Remember, the key principle here is that if you join the dots without the truth, you're going to go to a place you don't want to be. So we must find the truth and then join the dots. Now, yesterday I said to you one of the biggest issues that's developing is China. And we know that China is so important in this world, in every respect. And let's think about it, okay? Climate change. How much does China produce of the global emissions? 35%. 35%. COVID. Where did COVID originate? China. China has an effect on all our lives. Some of us don't even realise just how much it affects us. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to join the dots for you on why China's developing economic implosion will affect your house price. That's joining the dots. Now, as I mentioned yesterday, my debut on Dubai Radio, and in the end, I spent 4 years from March 09 solidly through to November 13, every Sunday, every week, 2 hours on Dubai Radio, talking about property market generally. But I started with a stunning debut where I predicted Dubai's house prices would fall 70% in the middle of 08, when everything was booming, everyone was delighted, everyone was happy. The radio show was the most popular on Dubai Radio. Why? Because everyone had a house. Everyone wanted to know what happens to house prices. So let's join the dots from China's implosion to your house price. In 08, or middle of 07 in fact, I saw the global financial crisis developing. And then that was shown to be real when Northern Rock collapsed in, I think it was October 07. And then Bear Stearns, an American investment bank, collapsed in March 08. On the back of derivatives and various pieces of paper representing mortgages, representing houses, representing your property, and you totally oblivious to it. That was going on. And then, so when I went on the radio in June, having seen a global house price or a global financial crisis coming, I knew through the banking system this would infect all markets. So what are we seeing at the moment that says to me, if I join the dots today, I can see a clear path from China's economic collapse through to your house price? Is that possible? Yes, it is. So what we're seeing is the collapse of the second biggest economy in the world. Now, to give you some sort of scale on that, the actual loss in property values in China already are touching $20 trillion. Goldman Sachs said in 2021 that the Chinese property market was worth $62 trillion. A third of that has gone. So let's round it down to 20 trillion. 20 trillion has gone. Now, when subprime happened in America, and when the Fed started to get involved in the subprime massacre, they said, Ben Bernanke, the chairman of the Fed, with all the data, all the laptops, all the staff, all the numbers, everything available to him, said subprime will be no more than a $50 billion problem. And I said at the time, well, hold on, 50 billion, that's nothing. I looked at it and thought 3 trillion. The end figure, when we've all settled down and a year later when everyone's looking at the damage, $3.4 trillion. So think of that now in the scale of China. China's collapse in property values is $20 trillion, 6 times subprime. And it hasn't stopped. Prices are still falling. So we haven't reached the bottom yet. Now, what I'm seeing and detecting from around the world is the knock-on effect. Australian house prices are falling, New Zealand house prices are falling, Canadian house prices are falling. Now, I mention those three particularly. Why? Because their economies depend on China. We didn't see a subprime crash in Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Why? because China printed an incredible amount of money to get China past subprime effects, and it worked. But obviously it caused their own subprime, because 8 years later there they were staring down a property collapse or a property boom, which would lead to a collapse. And that's where we are. So joining the dots, house prices, Canada, Australia, New Zealand falling. America now, over half the states falling. Supply of properties vastly up, demand for properties substantially down. Imbalance, economics 101, prices fall. Now you're getting reports out of the Times and the Telegraph on the UK market as well. Prices are turning. The Labour regulations on the non-doms has hit London house prices. Any property collapse starts at the centre. The centre is London. So for UK viewers, you're going to see a property collapse starting in London and spreading out from the southeast and then across the country. But why? Just because China's got an economic implosion, why are we seeing house prices, or why will we see house prices? If I join the dots, why will we see house prices collapse? You have to consider the elements that make up the global banking system. And the key word in any banking system, in any economy, is liquidity. Do you have enough liquidity to meet the needs of those who wish to borrow? Well, not in a crisis. Okay, not in a crisis. And as a crisis just starts, people start to feel it. People start to think, oh, this isn't 100% right. Okay, that's when banks start to look at their books, their lending books, and think, well, we can just pare a bit back here, we can pare a bit back there, we can not lend so much here. And that starts to condense the amount of money available, and therefore the price of the assets that money chases. Where else am I seeing it? Because that's just one pathway. I'm seeing it in private equity. There is no more money now for private equity. And private equity companies who've invested in private companies can no longer go to the market and float them, do an IPO, get their money back. They're stuck. Same things happen to private credit. Okay, so there are many, many dots to join here. The same thing has happened, would you believe, to artwork. Sotheby's had an auction recently and the prices were substantially down. And one piece that was expected to sell for $100 million because its sister piece had sold for 70 million some years ago, and this was a better piece in most people's view, didn't sell. No offers. Started the offer at 54 million, no offers, no bids, didn't sell. These are dots which often people just can't join because they don't seem to be relevant, but they are. Liquidity is drying up fast across the world. We're seeing it now. Now, there's one person who I follow on YouTube, well, there's many people I follow on YouTube, but there's one particular person whose site you should look at, and his name is Greg Mannarino. He's extremely passionate, and that really is the word. He's passionate because he wants people to get the truth and he knows you're not getting it. And so Mike Small is a mild version of Greg Mannarino. I don't want to get too passionate with you, but I want to get enough emotion into you to understand that what I'm telling you is likely true. And therefore, it's likely to impact you. A Chinese property implosion will in the end work through the banking system just as subprime did and cause a liquidity crisis. And that's already affecting private equity, it's affecting private credit, it's even affecting art. So there is a general withdrawal of liquidity, and once the banking system, having been a banker for many years, once a banking system senses that it needs to stop lending so much, it's really a race to the bottom, because every bank then starts to lend less. And then they look at each other and say, well, should we be lending to this bank? And should we be lending to that bank? Now that, I'll take you back to Dubai 08. And I could see very clearly in June 08, although we hadn't seen any price falls, we hadn't seen any bad news, I could see clearly that the banking systems in the world would regard Dubai as a higher risk to lend to, and therefore the interbank lines to the Dubai banks would be restricted, removed, cancelled, postponed, suspended, whatever word you want to use, it doesn't matter. The money wouldn't be there. And at that point, no mortgages would be available. And at that point, there's no demand. And at that point, there's distressed sales. And it starts with distressed sales, and then it works through the system to many sales. And therefore, the whole price system collapses. We're seeing that in China for the last 4 years. I promise you. Go and look it up. Evergrande, the biggest property company on this planet, went bust in 21. They still haven't sorted it out because it's such an enormous mess. But its effect on the banking system and on property in China is colossal. Now we've seen 4 years of price falls. If you go on to another site I will recommend that you look at, if you're particularly looking at China and its effects, there's a site called China Update, run by a very passionate guy, a Kiwi, a very straightforward guy, very practical, data-driven, very honest in my view, Kiwi presenter called Tony. China Update, look it up. And he talks about this constantly because he looks at the data and he receives the data, he analyses the data. Me, I like to join the dots beyond the data. The data can be very misleading. We all know that Chinese data is very misleading. And if you don't, well, please, you need to wake up because it is. So, what do we have? We have a Chinese banking property collapse. Hasn't affected their banks yet because they don't declare their problems. China is a closed book. But what's happening around the rest of the world, New Zealand, Australia, Canada particularly, those are the 3 markets that are really being hit quite hard at the moment. That's because of the China effect. Remember, New Zealand, Australia and Canada all interact with China tremendously. But once those markets start to fall substantially, New Zealand particularly, Australia, Canada, once they start to fall, then banks look beyond those 3 countries into America, UK, maybe some exaggerated markets around the world. Again, I fear for Dubai, I'm afraid. It's got tremendous opportunities, but it's also got tremendously over-optimistic buyers causing tremendously overpriced property relative to the liquidity situation that will exist in this world in 6 months to a year's time. Remember, my job's to look forward for you. Join the dots that I can see now so that you can plan based on the truth and the likely outcomes of joining those dots. It is so important to think forwards and not live in the world of the newspapers and the BBC and the other media that will only report a crash 3 months after it's happened. It's too late for you. It's far too late. Okay, so I'll wrap this episode up. We'll keep it to just house price because it's such an important, and I know it's such an emotional issue for most people, and I know it's the way most people accumulate their wealth, especially in the UK, but also in other countries around Europe, particularly as well. America, they're more into shares, but their house price also drives them. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, suffering massively. So please, think about this. China's economic implosion will affect your house price value, just as the subprime crash in parts of America affected house prices across the Western Hemisphere. So for today, thank you very much for watching. Please, if you can, press the subscribe button, which will mean that you get these updates reported to you and you can see when they're coming. And also, if you could, press the like button, because every time that subscribe button and that like button gets pressed, the chances are the algorithms will pick up this site and allow more people to see it. And my aim is to help you, I promise. That's my aim. Thank you very much for watching.